Yae Miko is fun. Here's why. On Yae's initial release, she was met with some hefty criticism, largely being seen as a worse Fischl with clunkier movement and longer mandatory field time. I'm going to try to convince you otherwise. She's more like a better coaching.
Watch yourself.
Let's talk about her animations. Her normal attack is a beautiful 3-hit combo firing Fox Spirits with cherry blossom petals trailing close behind. The attack is simultaneously quick and graceful, attributed by the fox's agility and dexterity. They snake back and forth like the smooth current of a river. Get it? Because it's electricity? It has a current. In contrast, her charged attack starts with a small wind-up like a predator poising to strike its prey. Our feisty little fox spirit darts along the ground 6 times, bringing down lightning bolts as it prances. It's important to note that while the attack visually and audibly has 6 hits, most enemies will only receive 1. Some larger enemies can receive 2 instances of damage, but I've never seen more than that hit a single target at once. On the bright side, each hit of her charged attack will apply Electro, so you can get up to 2 Aggravate procs per swing. If you want to cancel the attack, the time to do so is as the fox spirit is curving upwards, raring to strike. Onto her skill. Yae's E can and should be activated 3 times. Each activation places a fox totem, and when you allow them to skulk around, they hulk around. Placing totems within proximity of one another increases their level and therefore damage output. Improper totem positioning will cost you damage, so your movement is limited. That's not necessarily a bad thing though. Cowardly gameplay is not rewarded, forcing you to dance around your enemy, almost giving you the feeling that you're toying with them, like a cat or fox playing with its next meal. Looking at the animation more closely, it's a quick dash followed by a graceful landing, and you get 3 of them. Be careful, as these are not invincibility frames. They should be though. Also, I want to touch Fluffy Tail. Moving on to the elemental burst, your screen darkens as an ominous fox spirit rises from behind as if to say, "Don't talk to me or my son ever again," swiftly gobbling up her existing fox kits, converting them to Tenko Thunderbolts. Your screen shakes, emphasizing the width of the new asshole you just ripped into the enemy. And as if that weren't enough, the Tenko bolts follow. Lightning strikes twice. Thrice. Thrice? Four-ice? Quadrice.
That's quite enough.
Also, I want to touch Fluffy Tail. Beautiful animations aside, let's see how this Vixen's fixin' to get her kicks and tricks in. Genshin Impact with its elemental reaction system provides the most interesting combat dynamics in mixing and matching characters and elements to see what kind of crazy stuff you can cook up. The first and most obvious choice for a teammate is Raiden Shogun. Why stop at 1 mommy when you can have 2? Selecting our supports, Bennett and Kazuha are the ideal choices, allowing you to buff both Yae's and Raiden's bursts. The team feels strong, fluid, and synergistic, since trying to use Yae's burst every rotation has high ER requirements, but Raiden acts as a strong battery and DPS to heavily alleviate her demands. The next obvious choice from a meta perspective is Aggravate. Nahida is a top pick for this team with her consistent Dendro application and strong personal damage. Fischl is the next obvious choice, supporting Yae with enough energy to fuel her burst and high personal damage due to her Ascension 4 passive. For every Aggravate Yae procs, Fischl will almost match her 1-to-1, as Fischl's Ascension 4 only has a cooldown of about half a second and doesn't have an internal cooldown on the actual elemental application. The last slot is somewhat flexible. An Animo unit like Kazuha or Sucrose is ideal, as Kazuha can buff elemental damage and Sucrose brings an elemental mastery buff, but Nahida's Dendro application is a little too strong, oftentimes overpowering your Electro Aura or lack thereof. This can make trying to scroll somewhat difficult. You can go a few places from here. Either replace Nahida with a different Dendro unit that has weaker application, or forsake your swirls entirely. If you roll with the former, Baiju is a great option, as the team normally lacks a sustaining unit, but that's not to say you can't use someone like Yao Yao or Kurara instead. If you insist on keeping Nahida but want a sustaining unit, you can opt for Sayu, Jean, or Xianyun, the last being the preferable of the 3 since it allows Yae to turn any given area into a bounce house and she can aggravate on every plunge. Should you settle on sacrificing your swirls, you can bring a defensive option like Zhongli or another Dendro unit for the elemental resonance. In a team like this, everyone likes EM. And in the event you wish to keep Nahida and Kazuha or Sucrose, you can swap out Fischl for someone like Kuki or Dori, but Oz is a lot of heavy lifting and I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. Moving over to Aggravate's cooler cousin, we have Hyperbloom. Typically, I would only recommend this team to the down baddest of Yae Miko mains, as her totems have incredibly small AoE and won't target cores on their own, and trying to reliably trigger Dendro cores with her normal attacks is like trying to get a cat to follow orders, except the cat is deaf. and it hates you. But with the release of Xianyun, hitting Dendro cores has never been easier. If you want some to pop, just give it a hop. So, a team like that would look something like this. Your Dendro unit should be someone with relatively high Dendro application. Nahida is the clear winner, but units like Dendro Traveler and Kali can work. After that, your Hydro unit is also pretty flexible. Farina feels like the best choice here given her natural synergy with healers and her ability to buff Yai's plunge and totem damage, but any off-field Hydro applicators like Xingqiu and Yelan are good options if you don't mind weaving normal attacks between plunges. Finally, if you want, you can choose to replace Xianyun, like a psychopath. If you're willing to do that to yourself, I find units like Sucrose and especially Venti to be pretty good options, as they can group Dendro cores together, making them easier to hit. If you have Electro applied to an enemy, your Animo unit can even swirl it off and trigger a Hyperbloom themselves. If you don't want to bring an Animo unit here, you can tag Fischl back in, bring another Dendro unit, or go for a Shielder. Kokomi is a good substitute for a Hydro unit if you want to consolidate off-field Hydro application and healing. Likewise, Baiju is another good pick for taking the off-field Dendro application and healing roles. The point is, you have a lot of options. Next, we can check out the side where the grass is greener, looking at the spread-focused version of Quicken. In teams like these, more emphasis is put on units like Alhaitham, Tignari, or whoever you choose to be your primary Dendro driver. Yai is generally off-field for teams like this, where her job is to regularly apply Electro to keep Quicken uptime, so if you like Yai but don't want her to overstay her welcome or don't like using her as a driver, this is something you can try out. Looking a little on the weirder side, Overload is cringe, but not as cringe as it used to be. Spiral Abyss in the more recent cycles has started adding heavier and heavier enemies on the later floors, effectively removing the annoying knockback that created the overloaded stigma in the first place. It may not have been something for consideration before, but with the recent release of Cheverus, you can reduce Xiangling's usage in other teams and recycle her for a new one. The team restrictions are a little tighter here considering you're limited to Pyro and Electro characters only, but you can make it work with units like Raiden or Bennett. Getting a little less weird, but still not so traditional, Overvape is a thing. Hu Tao is a unit that's not overly reliant on Bennett and is somewhat anti-synergistic with healers, so despite a certain recent Crane elevating her to a new playstyle, she basically loses passives that activate when she's below 50% of her health. While it is fine, it feels weird, so even if you have the resources available to you, you may still feel most comfortable in the old double Hydro Hu Tao compositions where you fully utilize her kit. But what if your Xingqiu is otherwise occupied or you don't have Yelan? An older Hu Tao option used Xingqiu and double Geo, but even then, it didn't really feel like a home. Something you can do to spice things up is slot in Yai and watch as reactions fly. Yai and Yelan or Xingqiu will keep Electro charging, with both Hydro and Electro auras simultaneously existing on an enemy, while Hu Tao can utilize both to vaporize and overload. You can even do something like this with units like Yoimiya, Yanfei, and anyone else who can easily proc Xingqiu or Yelan's bursts, but I believe it's generally better to run them with an Animo unit and Bennett instead. And finally, we go old school with Taser. Xingqiu and Fischl make their appearances yet again as two very strong options. Sucrose is also back, being a fan-favorite driver for this team, but you can on-field Yai if you so choose and replace Sucrose with someone like Kazuha. With Xingqiu's damage reduction and Taser's naturally high stagger, this team often doesn't require a sustain unit since enemies can find themselves struggling to strike. If you need even more girth, you can substitute Fischl for Beidou and you'll be nigh unkillable. Those are all of the teams I plan to cover, but if you have a fun way to play her that I failed to mention, I'd love to know where you found success. Or failure. Now what about the open world? In a land where high mobility units and water walkers are king, can Yai hold her own with regards to fun? No. But kinda? There is a certain convenience to being able to kill something without having to run over to it, though that is not specific to Yai. Characters like Ganyu and Yoimiya can murder hilly trolls from afar, and with ease, but as far as effort goes, Yai is fairly hands-off. While Yai lacks the range of a bow unit, she compensates with mobility. You can E, dodge, and dodge, and while it's not on par with units like Yelan or Xianyun, Yai's extra little movements can fill the gaps for your other Uber drivers when they need a break. You'll only need to live with the weight of the cats you've zapped along the way. Finally, the reason I blew my entire load on Yai's debut banner and continue to enjoy using her to this day. Her personality. I am down bad. I have a type. It's pink with a chance of violent stomping. MiHoYo's done an excellent job of taking what you might think a fox would be like and personifying it, and their respective voice actresses execute to perfection.
Now, come on, do something amusing for me.
Wily, cunning, oddly self-aware, and apparently they don't share. At least, not outside of their own kits. Speaking of kits, hers perfectly embodies her characterization. She establishes her totems just as she's established her publishing house, and now she watches as people squirm, profits rise, and her personal entertainment ensues. She's an observer that only steps in to get the ball rolling or when absolutely necessary. Sometimes a little charisma goes a long way, and a long way goes through my wallet. So, After all this time, the fox actually says,
Right here, right now. Emerge.